Hello everyone, I'm Karen LeBlanc with the Design Tourist, and we are here at the Modernism Museum in Mount Dora, Florida, where I'm going to take you on a fascinating journey through one of the most definitive collections of art objects by the Memphis Group. Now, to understand this design movement, I'm going to take you back to the 1980s. Think about that decade. Big hair, loud clothing, neon colors, everything was outrageous and over the top, which set the scene for a group of designers who came together and created their own design language that broke almost every design rule. Joining me now is Stephen Coburn. He is with the Modernism Museum, and he's going to take us on a tour of this collection of art objects by the Memphis Group. But first, let's start with the name. Now, despite what people may think, the Memphis Group really wasn't from Memphis, right?
No, that's not true. Well, they were based out of Milan, Italy, but an important note is that they were an international group of artists from all over the world, based in Milan. And the name Memphis actually came from a Bob Dylan song, Stuck in Mobile with the Memphis Blues Again. The story goes that during the night when they were trying to come up with this name, trying so hard to come up with something so good, Ettore Sottsass, the father of the Memphis Group, finally just said, let's call it Memphis.
The Memphis Group kind of grew out of a rebellion from the modernism and the minimalism that had dominated the decades prior.
Right, yeah. Memphis always divided opinions. Some people, especially in the established design world, really hated it. And then others, such as David Bowie, who is not just a pop icon, but an art collector and an art critic, a very keen eye for these things, absolutely loved this furniture.
The Modernism Museum has a significant part of David Bowie's own private collection of Memphis art objects. How did that come to be?
Well, everything here was acquired, like the rest of the objects in our museum, privately. The Bowie pieces were acquired at an auction in 2016.
All right, so we start our tour with this vignette. What are we sitting on?
This is the Lido Sofa, it's called, by Michele De Lucchi. The couch that we're sitting on did belong to David Bowie. It was in his private collection, along with these side tables, actually, and this beautiful table over here, Continental. All of this furniture is by Italian designer Michele De Lucchi.
To me, the Memphis Group art objects are humorous, comical, almost
childlike.
Childlike, yes. When you walk, it does. When you walk into a room with a Memphis art object, you feel buoyant and exuberant and happy, but they used materials that were actually very affordable. This wasn't high-end luxury materials that they were making these art objects out of.
No, you're right. MDF, medium density fiberboard, Formica is the brand name of that. It does happen to be slightly less expensive, but for the Memphis artists, Formica gave them a new kind of versatility that we hadn't seen before. Always, when you have an artistic revolution or some kind of progress, it is accompanied by technological advances or new materials are developed, and in this case it was the Formica. Now, this wasn't something new, but this was something that previously was used in fast food restaurants and bathroom countertops, and certainly not taken seriously as an art object.
Yeah, so it's interesting to me, the Memphis Group was all about bold use of color and pattern, sometimes crazy, mind-boggling pattern. For example, this rug right here.
Yeah, this is a great example of a rug. This graphic was designed by Nathalie Dupasquier, who is one of only 2 women associated with the Memphis Group, which is important because she really added an element of all of the graphic design.
Stephen, this is one of my favorite pieces in the exhibit because it is by architect and designer Michael Graves, whom I had a personal affinity for. He was arguably known as the father of postmodernism, but he dabbled in the Memphis Group aesthetic. So tell me about this.
You can see that architectural element to his work. So something interesting is that in the 1981 collection, the debut collection for Memphis, a lot of the pieces were named after hotels around the world, and this piece is called the Plaza, after the Plaza Hotel in New York. And it's clearly Art Deco inspired, and you can see even shaped like a skyscraper almost.
And the design elements have a lot of functionality because it does bathe the face in light. Absolutely. Being a vanity. So Stephen, this is a fun piece, and it kind of goes back to that sense of humor that the Memphis Group had in their design language. Tell me about this.
So this piece is called the Super Lamp. It's by French artist Martine Bedin. and she's another one of the women associated with the Memphis Group. And yeah, this is a really fun and playful thing. It looks like something out of a children's room almost, and it looks like a little house pet. You could even kind of take it for a walk with this leash here. Yeah.
And this was kind of iconic, right? It was widely photographed.
Absolutely. This is one of those pieces that got a lot of publicity, for better or worse. So most of the items in this room were designed by a married couple, Nathalie Dupasquier and George Souden. They were a design team, founding members of Memphis, and especially Dupasquier really worked on all the graphics and textiles for the Memphis Group. And then together with George Souden, they made a lot of iconic items, such as this table that we're sitting at, and as well as these chairs we're sitting on. This table is called the Madras Table by Dupasquier, and these chairs are called the Palace chairs, also by George Souden, and these were also part of Bowie's private collection.
All right, so we're going to turn our attention to the Valentine typewriter, which wasn't a part of the Memphis Group design objects, but it kind of planted a foundation, so to speak, for the work that came after, right?
Right, so we've included this in the exhibit because it's a great example of the kind of design environment that Memphis formed in Italy in the 1960s and the 1970s, particularly Ettore Sottsass, really the big influencer here. And this is one of his most iconic designs, the Valentine typewriter for Olivetti, made in 1968. Ettore Sottsass was the design consultant for Olivetti from 1958 to 1970. And so in addition to being one of Italy's most prominent architects, you really get an idea for his prominence.
Sottsass was older than most of the other members of the Memphis Group, and he's known as the founding father of this design movement. Why did he feel the need to transition in that direction with his design language?
Right, so when Ettore Sottsass started Memphis in 1981, he was already well into his 60s. For some people that might be considered retirement age, but not for Sottsass. He lived until 2007 at the age of 90, making work up until the end. And so Sottsass really loved this youthful vibrance that these designers gave him. In fact, all of the Memphis designers from the first collection in 1981 were in their 20s, and some of them were even still in design school.
So one of the American designers in the Memphis Group is over here. We're going to transition to this piece.
Sure.
Tell me about this chair.
So this chair is called the Bel Air. It's by American artist Peter Shires, another American contributor to the Memphis Group, and he is an artist based out of Los Angeles. So he brings this really great Southern California beachy vibe that isn't introduced anywhere else. And it's called the Bel Air again.
So Stephen, the Memphis Group produced not only furniture but ceramics as well. A lot of people may not think of ceramics when they think of the movement.
Right, the ceramics and glassware is a really important element of the Memphis Group. It wasn't just furniture, they also transferred all these ideas about color and pattern and postmodern design into ceramics, including anything from flower vases to tea kettles, as you can see here. So this bookshelf is called the Magnolia Bookcase, and it was designed by Andrea Bronzi, who is also an architect, and again, you can see this architectural element to this work. The way that this is constructed is almost as if it's a suspension bridge.
This has been one of the showstoppers of the exhibit, even though technically it's not a part of the Memphis Group artistic output.
Yeah, that's right. So we're standing in front of a very special piece indeed that we've included because the artist, Shiro Kuramata, was very closely associated with Memphis and made other pieces for the Memphis Group. But this piece was made in 1988, just after the breakup of Memphis in 1987. Still stems from that same design philosophy. He was fascinated with the idea of transparency, that an object could take up one space but not appear to do so. And so he experimented with a lot of transparent materials, especially acrylic. And he came up with a complicated proprietary process whereby the acrylic is dried in very thin layers to create this material, and then these synthetic roses are suspended in it. Now it's called the Miss Blanche chair, and that is actually after the character Miss Blanche in A Streetcar Named Desire. The artist made this in 1988 and sadly died in 1991 rather suddenly at the age of 56. And it wasn't for 10 years in 1998 that the last chair was produced. They made the 56th chair and decided to end production they felt that was appropriate as the artist died at the age of 56. This is another of Kuramata's experiments with transparency and with acrylic. And here, instead of suspending these synthetic roses, we have these dyed mallard feathers, and there's just 3 of them, and they're so delicate you almost don't realize they're there unless you're really looking at them. But something I find absolutely fascinating about this piece is the sense of weightlessness, the way that these feathers are floating there as if just an eternal free fall, yet this is still a solid block of acrylic and weighs a ton. So it's far from weightless, but it looks like you could pick it up with your pinky.
Memphis Group is known for its experimentation with material. I think this is a great example.
Yeah, this is a totally different material that we haven't really seen before in the Memphis collection. And so this chair here was designed by Marco Zanini, who actually was known as a ceramicist and did a lot of those interesting ceramics for the Memphis Group. But this piece here, I think you can see the influence of being a ceramic artist, because it feels like something that you could just place on your tabletop, but they've just scaled it up to functional size.
And it's made of fiberglass,
yeah,
correct?
It's this molded fiberglass with this shimmering green effect too. It looks like something almost out of the Emerald City. It reminds people of Wizard of Oz.
It really does. So the Memphis Group designers drew inspiration from a multitude of muses. This is an interesting piece, right? Because it shows inspiration from automotive design.
This sideboard here was made by Italian artist Massimo Iosaghihi, and this looks quite different again than some of the other objects in our collection, and that's because this is the only object that we have by this particular designer. So that's why it looks a little bit different than it does, or than the others. However, yeah, this does get inspiration from kind of automotive design, and I get a lot of boats and submarines too, even. Everyone seems to have a different idea of what this looks like.
It's definitely aerodynamic in its design.
This bed, and we call it a bed loosely, it's called the Tawaraya, and it's named after a famous Japanese hotel again. This is from Memphis's debut collection, and this photograph we have up here actually shows the Memphis Group in 1981. This is a lot of the core designers, including Ettore Sottsass and the gray mustache. Now we call it a bed, but that's again a loose term. This was designed by a Japanese artist, Masamori Umeda, and this was designed with lots of purposes in mind. These mats here are actually traditional Japanese floor coverings. They're called tatami mats.
So the table is from David Bowie's private collection of Memphis objects?
Yeah, that's right. It's called the Palm Spring Table, and it belonged to Bowie.
So the chairs we have to point out, because the Memphis Group objects really weren't mass produced except for this chair,
right?
Correct?
So these objects in the 1980s, when you could go buy them, you had to purchase them through a gallery of some sort or a dealer. It wasn't exactly attainable, not to mention very expensive. And as a consequence, a lot of these items were produced in very limited quantities, which makes them rare. But there is one exception to that, and that is these chairs. They were picked up by even a few restaurants, I think, during the 1980s, and they were the only real commercially successful Memphis item during the 1980s, and there were about 3,000 of them produced.
So this is probably the most recognizable piece from Memphis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. This is the Carlton Bookcase. It was designed by Ettore Sottsass for Memphis, and it's so well known from, again, those photographs and publicity circulating, but this piece really encapsulates everything that Memphis is about. We have this out-of-this-world colors, of course, heavy use of this plastic laminate for mica. There's this anthropomorphic element even. It almost looks like there's a stick figure human standing right here. And then on top of all of that, really, what is it? It's a bookcase, it's a room divider, it's a sideboard, it's a bookshelf. You're not really quite sure what it is, and it could be used for lots of different things, and it's classic Memphis.
And this piece was from David Bowie's private collection.
In a 2002 article, David Bowie wrote about his Carlton bookcase, and he described the feeling when you walk into a room with something like the Carlton bookcase, that it's a visceral reaction. That was the kind of feeling he got from this furniture and why he lived with it.
Now, before we go, I do want to point out that the pieces we are showing you are just a part of art objects from the Memphis Group that the museum has.
Right, so we're a pretty small museum, which is a great thing, but we have a massive collection, and we're not able to display all of even the most important Memphis pieces that we have available to us. And so since this exhibit has been so popular, in the summer of 2019, we're going to be refreshing this exhibit and putting in some of those other pieces that we just couldn't display all at once.
All right, well, thank you so much for taking us on a tour. It has been fun and fascinating. And for all of you, be sure to check out the Modernism Museum's website for upcoming dates on the latest exhibits.